Marisol got into an intense relationship with the people on the facts of life, to the point where Mrs. Garrett and Tootie became her imaginary best friends. And she shared every last thought with them. She told Tootie about the rash that she got from wearing the same bra every day for 2 years. And she had a long talk with Mrs. Garrett about her regrets that she hadn't said a proper goodbye to her best friend Julie and her on-again, off-again boyfriend Rod before they died along with everybody else on Earth. The Panic Room had pretty much every TV show ever made on its massive hard drive, with multiple backup systems and a fail-proof generator, so there was nothing stopping Marisol from marathoning the facts of life for 16 hours a day, starting over again from season 1 when she got to the end of the bedraggled final season. She also watched Mad Men and The West Wing. The Meteor server also had tons of video of live theater, but Marisol didn't watch that because it made her feel guilty. Not survivor guilt, but failed playwright guilt. Her last proper conversation with a living human had been an argument with her friend Julie about Marisol's decision to go to medical school instead of trying to write more plays. "Fuck doctors, man," Julie had spat. "People are going to die no matter what you do. Theater is important." Marisol had hung up on Julie and gone back to her pre-med books, staring at the exposed musculature and blood vessels as if they were costume designs for a theater troupe of skeletons. The quakes always happened at the worst moment, just as Joe or Blair was about to reveal something heartfelt and serious. The whole Panic Room would shake, throwing Marisol against the padded walls or ceiling over and over again, a reminder that the rest of the world was probably dead. At first, these quakes were constant. Then they happened a few times a day, then once a day, then a few times a week, then a few times a month. Marisol knew that once a month or two had passed without the world going sideways, she would have to go out and investigate. She would have to leave her friends at the Eastland School and venture out into what was probably a bleak world. Sometimes Marisol thought she had a duty to stay in the Panic Room since she was personally keeping the human race alive. But then she thought, what if there was someone else living out there and they needed help? Marisol was pre-med, she might be able to do something. What if there was a man and Marisol could help him repopulate the species? The Panic Room had blue leather walls and a carpeted floor that felt nice to walk on, and enough gourmet frozen dinners to last Marisol a few lifetimes. She only had the pair of shoes that she'd brought in there with her, and it would seem weird to wear shoes again after 2 barefoot years. The real world was here in the Panic Room. Out there was just the after image of a bad trip. Marisol was an award-winning playwright, but that had not saved her from the end of the world. She was taking pre-med classes and trying to get a scholarship for med school so she could give cancer screenings to poor women in her native Taos, but that didn't save her either, nor did the fact that she believed in God every other day. What actually saved Marisol from the end of the world was that she took a job cleaning Burton Henstridge's mansion to help her through school, and she had just happened to be scrubbing his fancy Japanese toilet when the quakes had started, within easy reach of Burton's state-of-the-art Panic Room. She had found the hidden opening mechanism some weeks earlier while cleaning the porcelain cat figurines. Burton himself was in Bulgaria scouting a location for a nanofabrication facility and had probably died instantly. When Marisol thought about all the people that she could never talk to again, she got so choked up she wanted to punch someone in the eye until they were blinded for life. She experienced grief in the form of freakouts that left her unable to breathe or think, and then she would pop in another fact of life. As she watched, she chewed her nails until she was in danger of gnawing off her fingertips. The door to the Panic Room wouldn't actually open when Marisol finally decided it had been a couple of months since the last quake and it was time to go get the hell out there. She had to kick the door a few dozen times until she dislodged enough of the debris or whatever blocking it to stagger out into the wasteland. And then the cold slapped her in the face and extremities, extra bitter after 2 years at room temperature. Burton's house was gone. The Panic Room was just a cube, half buried in the ruins, covered in some yellowy insulation that it looked as though it would burn your fingers. Everything out there was white, like snow or paper, except powdery and brittle. Ashen. She had a Geiger counter from the Panic Room, which read 0. She couldn't figure out what the hell had happened to the world for a long, long time until it hit her. This was fungus. Some kind of newly made, highly corrosive fungus that had rushed over everything like a tidal wave and consumed every last bit of organic material and then died. It had come in wave after wave, with incredible violence, until it had exhausted the last of its food supply and crushed everything to dust. She gleaned this from the consistency of the crud that had coated every bit of rubble, but also from the putrid, sweet and sour smell that she could not stop smelling once she noticed it. She kept imagining that she saw the white powder starting to move out of the corner of her eye, advancing towards her, but then when she would turn around, there was nothing. The fungus would have all died out when there was nothing left for it to feed on, Marisol said out loud. There's no way it could still be active. She tried to pretend some other person, an expert or somebody, had said that, and thus it was authoritative. The fungus was dead. It could not hurt her now, because if the fungus wasn't dead, she was screwed. Even if it didn't kill her, it would destroy the panic room and all its contents, because she hadn't been able to seal it properly behind her without locking herself out. Hello? Marisol kept yelling, out of practice at even trying to project her voice. Anybody there? Anybody? She couldn't even make sense of the landscape. It was just blinding white, as far as she could see, with bits of blanched stonework jutting out. No way to discern streets or houses or cars or anything, because it had all been corroded or devoured. She was about to go back to the panic room and hope that it was still untouched so she could eat another frozen lamb vindaloo and watch season 3 of Mad Men. And then she spotted something, a dot of color, a long way off in the pale ruins. The bottle was a pale oaky green, like smoked glass, with a cork in it, and it was about 20 yards away, just sitting in one of the endless piles of white debris. Somehow it had avoided being consumed or rusted or broken in the endless waves of fungal devastation. It looked as though someone had just put it down a second ago. In fact, Marisol's first response was to yell, "Hello!" even louder than before. When there was no answer, she picked up the bottle. In her hands it felt bumpy, like an embossed label had been worn away, and there didn't seem to be any liquid inside. She couldn't see its contents, if any. She removed the cork. A whoosh broke the dead silence. A sparkly mist streamed out of the bottle's narrow mouth, glittering like the cheap glitter at the arts and crafts table at summer camp when Marisol was a little girl, misty like a smoke machine at a cheap nightclub. And it slowly resolved into a shape in front of Marisol, a man, a little taller than her and much bigger. Marisol was so startled and grateful at no longer being alone, she almost didn't pause to wonder how this man had appeared out of nowhere after she opened a bottle that had survived when everything else was crushed. Then she did start to wonder, but the only explanation seemed too ludicrous to believe. "Hello and congratulations," the man said in a pleasant tone. He looked Jewish and wore a cheap suit, in a style that reminded Marisol somewhat of the Mad Men episodes she had just been watching. His dark hair fell into his high forehead in lank strands, and he had a heavy beard shadow. "Thank you for opening my bottle. I am pleased to offer you 3 wishes. Then he looked around, and his already dour expression worsened. "Oh, fuck," he said. "Not again." "Wait," Marisol said. You're a genie?" "I hate that term," the man said. "I prefer wish facilitator." "And for your information, I used to be just a regular person. I was the theater critic at the New York Times for 6 months in 1958, which I think still defines me much more than my current engagement does. But I tried to bamboozle the wrong individual, so I got stuck in a bottle and forced to grant wishes to whoever opens it." "You were a theater critic?" Marisol said. "I'm a playwright. I won a contest and I had a play produced off-Broadway. Well, off-Broadway. And actually, I'm a pre-med student and I clean houses for money, but in my off hours, I'm a playwright, I guess." "Oh," the man said. "Well, if you want me to tell you that your plays are very good, then that will count as one of your wishes. And honestly, I do not think you are going to benefit from good publicity very much in the current climate." He gestured around the bleak white landscape around them. "My name was Richard Wolfe, by the way." "Marisol," she said. "Marisol Guzman. Nice to meet you." He extended his hand, but didn't actually try to shake hers. She wondered if she would go straight through him. She was standing in a world of stinky chalk, talking to a self-loathing genie. After 2 years alone in a box, that didn't even seem weird, really. So this was it, right? She could fix everything. She could make a wish and everything would be back the way it was. She could talk to Julie again and apologize for hanging up on her. She could see Rod and maybe figure out what they were to each other. She just had to say the words, "I wish." She started to speak, and then something Richard Wolfe had said a moment earlier registered in her brain. "Wait a minute," she said. "What did you mean, not again?" "Oh, that." Richard Wolfe swatted around his head with big hands like he was trying to kill non-existent insects. I couldn't say. I mean, I can answer any question you want, but that counts as one of your wishes. There are rules. Oh, Marisol said, well, I don't want to waste a wish on a question, not when I can figure this out on my own. You said not again the moment you saw all of this, so this isn't the first time this has happened. Your bottle can probably survive anything, right? Because it's magic or something. The dark green bottle still had a heft to it, even after she'd released its contents. She threw it at a nearby rock a few times. Not a scratch. So, she said, the world ends, your bottle doesn't get damaged. If even one person survives, they find your bottle. And the first thing they wish for is for the world not to have ended. Richard Wolff shrugged, but kind of nodded at the same time, like he was confirming her hunch. His feet were see-through, she noticed. He was wearing wingtip shoes that looked scuffed to the point of being scarred. The first time was in 1962, he said. The Cuban Missile Crisis, they called it afterwards. This is not counting as one of my wishes because I didn't ask a question, Marisol said. Fine, fine, Richard Wolff rolled his eyes. I got tired of listening to you harangue. When I was reviewing plays for the Times, I always tore into plays that had too many endless speeches. Your plays don't have a lot of monologues, do they? Fucking Brecht made everybody think that 3-page speeches were clever. Fucking Brecht. I didn't go in for too many monologues, Marisol said. So, somebody finds your bottle, they wish for the apocalypse not to have happened, and then they probably make a second wish to try and make sure it doesn't happen again, except here we are, so it obviously didn't work the last time. I could not possibly comment, Richard Wolff said, although I should say that people get the wrong idea about people in my line of work, meaning wish facilitators, not theater critics. People had the wrong idea when I was a theater critic as well. They thought it was my job to promote the theater, to put bums in seats, even for terrible plays. That was not my job at all. The theater has been an endangered species for a long time, Marisol said, not without sympathy. She looked around the pasty white, yeast-scented landscape, a world of Wonder Bread. I mean, I get why people want criticism that is essentially cheerleading. I mean, even if that doesn't push people to do their best work. Well, if you think of theater as some kind of delicate flower that needs to be protected in some kind of hothouse, and at this point, Richard Wolff was clearly reprising arguments that he'd had over and over again when he was alive. Then you're going to end up with something that only the faithful few will appreciate, and you'll end up worsening the very marginalization that you're seeking to prevent. Marisol was very careful to avoid asking anything that even resembled a question because she was probably going to need all 3 of her wishes. I would guess that the job of a theater critic is misunderstood in sort of the opposite way of the job of a genie, a wish facilitator, she said. Everybody's afraid a theater critic will be too brutally honest, but a genie, everybody thinks I'm out to swindle them. Richard Wolff threw his hands in the air, thinking of all the tsuris he had endured, when in fact it's always the client who can't express a wish in clear and straightforward terms. They always leave out crucial information. I do my best. It's like stage directions without any stage left or stage right. I interpret as best I can. Of course you do, Marisol said. This was all starting to creep her out. And her gratitude at having another person to talk to, who wasn't Mrs. Garrett, was getting driven out by her discomfort at standing in the bleach-white ruins of the world, kibitzing about theater criticism. She picked up the bottle where it lay undamaged after hitting the rock and found the cork. Wait a minute, Richard Wolff said. You don't want to. He was sucked back inside the bottle before she finished putting the cork back in. How am I doing for time? Cool, start waving and jumping up and down if I'm going over. She reopened the bottle once she was back inside the panic room with the door safely sealed from the inside. Then she watched 3 episodes of The Facts of Life, trying to get her equilibrium back before she microwaved some sukiyaki and let Richard Wolff out again. He started the spiel about how he had to give her 3 wishes all over again and then stopped and looked around. He sort of floated an inch above the sofa. Nice digs. Real calfskin on this sofa, huh? Is this like a bunker? I can't answer any of your questions, Marisol said, or that counts as a wish you owe me. Don't be like that. Richard Wolff ruffled his 2-tone lapels. I'm just trying not to create any loopholes, because once there are loopholes, it brings everybody grief in the end. Trust me, you wouldn't want the rules to be messy here. He rifled through the media collection until he found a copy of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which he made a big show of studying, until Marisol finally loaded it for him. This is better than I'd remembered, Richard Wolff said an hour later. Good to know, Marisol said. I never got around to watching that one. I met Tennessee Williams, you know, Richard said. He wasn't nearly as drunk as you might have thought. So here's what I figure. You do your level best to implement the wishes that people give you, to the letter, Marisol said. So if somebody says they want to make sure a nuclear war never happens again, you do your best to make a nuclear war impossible. And maybe that change leads to some other catastrophe, and then the next person tries to make some wishes that prevent that thing from happening again, and on, until this. This is actually the longest conversation I've ever had since I became a wish facilitator. Richard crossed his leg, ankle over thigh. Usually it's just womp bompalua, 3 wishes, and then I'm back in the bottle. So tell me about your prize-winning play. I mean, if you want, if it's up to you. Marisol told Richard about her play, which seemed like something that an acquaintance of hers had written many lifetimes ago. It was a one-act, she said, about a man who is trying to break up with his girlfriend. But every time he's about to dump her, she does something to remind him about why he used to love her. So he hires a male prostitute to seduce her instead, so she'll cheat on him and he can have a reason to break up with her. Richard was giving her a blank expression as though he couldn't trust himself to show a reaction. It's a comedy, Marisol explained. Sorry, Richard said, it sounds awful. He hires a male prostitute to sleep with his girlfriend? It sounds, I just don't know what to say. Well, you were a theater critic in the 1950s, right? I guess it was a different era. I don't think that's the problem. It just sounds sort of misanthropic, or actually woman-hating, with a slight veneer of irony. I don't know. Maybe that's the sort of thing everybody's into nowadays, or was into before the world ended yet again. This is something like the 5th or 6th time the world has ended. I'm losing count, to be quite honest. Marisol was quite put out that this fossil was casting aspersions on her play, her contest-winning play, in fact. But the longer she kept him talking, the more clues he dropped without casting her any wishes. So she bit her lip. So, there were half a dozen apocalypses, Marisol said. And I guessed each one of those was caused by people trying to prevent the last one from happening again, by making more wishes. So that white stuff out there, some kind of bioengineered corrosive fungus, I thought. But maybe it was created to prevent some kind of climate-related disaster? Does seem awfully reflective of sunlight. Oh yes, it reflects sunlight just wonderfully, Richard said. The temperature of the planet is going to be dropping rather a lot in the next decade. No danger of global warming now. Ha! Marisol said. And you claim you're just doing the most straightforward job possible. You're addicted to irony. You probably sat through too many Brecht plays, even though you claim to hate him. You probably loved Beckett as well. All right-thinking people love Beckett, said Richard. So you had some small success as a playwright, and now you're studying to be a doctor, or you were before this unfortunate business. Why not stick with the theater? Is that a question? Marisol said. Richard started to backpedal, but then she answered him anyway. I wanted to help people, really help people. Live theater reaches fewer and fewer people all the time, especially brand new plays by brand new playwrights. It's getting to be like poetry. Meanwhile, poor people are dying of preventable cancers every day back home in Taos. I couldn't fool myself that writing a play that 20 people saw would do as much good as screening 100 people for cervical cancer. Richard paused and looked her over. You're a good person, he said. I almost never get picked up by anybody who's not a terrible human being. It's all relative, she said. My protagonist, who hires a male prostitute to seduce his girlfriend, considers himself a good person too. Does it work? The male prostitute thing? Does she sleep with him? Are you asking me a question? Wolf shrugged and rolled his eyes in that operatic way he did, which he had probably practiced in the mirror. I will owe you an extra wish. Sure, why not? Does it work with the gigolo? Marisol had to search her memory for a second. She had written that play in such a different frame of mind. No, the boyfriend keeps feeding the male prostitute lines to seduce his girlfriend via a Bluetooth earpiece. It's meant to be a postmodern Cyrano de Bergerac, and she figures it out and starts using the male prostitute to screw with her boyfriend. And in the end, the boyfriend and the male prostitute get together because they've seduced each other while flirting with the girlfriend. Richard cringed on top of the sofa with his face in his insubstantial hands. That's terrible, he said. I can't believe I gave you an extra wish just to find that out. Wow, thanks. I can see why people hated you when you were a theater critic. Sorry, maybe it was better on the stage. I bet you have a flair for dialogue. It just sounds so hackneyed. Postmodern Cyrano de Bergerac? I heard all about postmodernism from this one graduate student who opened my bottle in the early 1990s. If it wasn't, and it sounded dreadful. If I wasn't already sort of dead, I would be slitting my wrists right now. You really did make a wise choice becoming a doctor. Screw you! Marisol decided to raid the relatively tiny liquor cabinet in the panic room and pour herself a generous vodka. You're the one who's been living in a bottle. So all of this is your fault. She waved her hand, indicating the devastation outside the panic room. You caused all of this with some excessively ironic wish granting. That's a very skewed construction of events. If the white sludge was caused by a wish somebody made, and I'm not saying it was, then it's not my fault. It's the fault of the wisher. Okay, Marisol said. Richard drew to attention, thinking that she was finally ready to make her first wish. Instead, she said, I need to think, and put the cork back in the bottle. You can read the rest of that at Tor.com in September. It's called As Good as New, and huge thanks to Clarion West for having me here and putting up with my insane diva demands and, and support the write-a-thon.